Good morning, everyone. My name is Annie Fink, and I am the Marketing Specialist for AVEVA Select California. Thank you for attending our Learn in 30 webinar today, focused on how to upgrade AVEVA system platform. After the webinar this morning, we'll be doing a short Q&A. Please type any questions or comments into the Q&A box, the chat box, or you can email us at webinar@california.avevaselect.com. Now I'd like to introduce your presenter for today's webinar, Tim Prost. Tim is the lead product specialist here at AVEVA Select California. Good morning, Tim.
Morning, Annie. Thanks for that introduction, and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining. So yeah, today we're going to talk about system platform upgrading and some best practices and things to consider when going through an upgrade. Now we only have 30 minutes, so I don't expect this to be all encompassing, but I do want a plan to cover, in some detail and definitely cover the highlights and important topics when it comes to upgrading a Galaxy for system platform. So hopefully everybody knows what system platform is that's on this call, but for those who don't, maybe I can do a quick kind of introduction of what system platform is. System platform is one of our SCADA offerings, and it's different in the fact that it's a service-oriented architecture, meaning system platform is really a collection of services, and those services can exist on one or multiple computers. And that service-based architecture allows for a very flexible solution that can kind of fit to however you want to implement the solution for you, right? It includes, development, our application object servers, which are kind of like the workhorse engine of system platform in terms of executing all the logic, reads and writes to PLCs, sending data to the historian, executing scripts, that kind of thing. The time series historian, which is a part of it, which is the repository for process data, alarm data, and event data within the system. And then the Galaxy repository, which is the application configuration database. So just as a couple of disclaimers, right? If you are considering an upgrade and, you want some assistance, feel free to reach out to us, AVEVA Select California, your preferred system integrator, or reach out to a handful of integrators, or AVEVA Corporate as well, right? We all have resources to help you plan and execute your upgrade. So in general, right, the upgrade workflow, right, has got three main steps, right? We've got planning and preparation, right? This involves reviewing all the existing documentation of current architecture, including things like software version, IP addresses, network schemes, those types of things, as well as the requirements for the upgrade, right? Are we just doing a version upgrade, or are we adding or adjusting things to the system, making changes to the application? Then ultimately, right, making all necessary backups, putting the environment in a test system, testing it, and then in terms of the actual execution, right, ensuring whatever environment that I'm executing that on, I've got the proper licensing. And in general, this isn't always the case, but in general, the upgrade order would be from a historian, be the first component, if you have one or multiple, then the GR, the Galaxy repository, then the automation object servers, and then any kind of visualization node, right? Whether that's an RDS server, whether that's a workstation, to be executed in that order. And we'll go over some more details as to why that might be. And then lastly, right, as with any upgrade or any project, right, is system validation, right? Verifying that the system is still working as expected or as it once was on the previous version. That can include things like the redundancy is still working, data collection, all the visualization, everything is consistent pre-migration. And ultimately, just kind of checking things like the logger for any errors and warnings. Other disclaimer, right? If you are experiencing technical issues on your current version, right? Don't necessarily think that, oh, if I upgrade, it's going to solve it, right? Consult with us, consult with tech support. to make sure that the upgrade is going to, the bugs that you might be experiencing are going to be resolved in a newer version, or there might be a hot fix out there to fix the known bug. So consult with us if you're experiencing technical issues, right? We're happy to help. So factors when upgrading a system, right? First and foremost is system architecture, right? The number of nodes that I have in my system, and the roles that those nodes place, right? Some customers have, very small all-in-one systems, right? Some customers have very large multi-node systems with, tens of platforms, or even more, right? So just understanding the complexity of the existing system and how that system architecture exists in its current state, and if we're taking this opportunity to make adjustments to and changes to that architecture going forward. Similar concepts go with application design, right? In terms of, are we, adjusting or changing features to the actual application, whether that's visualization features, whether that's back-end features of maybe how I/O is referenced, maybe how things are sending their data to the historians, how I'm displaying that information through ActiveX or .NET controls, right? Considering all those things. In terms of, network, right? We'll talk about that in a second, but really just ensuring that, things are on the proper subnets, and depending on the type of upgrade that we go, right? Ensuring that we don't get any IP or naming conflicts and things like that. And then, right, if some of our customers to this day are still, that they are running on physical OSs, right? Oftentimes when customers consider upgrading, moving over or migrating over to a virtualized environment, which really helps with the overall maintenance of a system. You can better allocate resources, easy to maintain, backups, restoring backups of VMs, are just a couple of pointers or highlights of why, might consider virtualization. On the security side of things, right? Am I using antivirus software? Do I want to implement TLS 1.2 certificates in terms of that node-to-node encryption? And then on the licensing side of things, right? Am I moving to, keeping my local license servers, or am I moving to a central license server? And if you're unsure or don't know, even after this presentation, feel free to consult with us and we're happy to talk with you. So we kind of talked about these, right? Just kind of outlining the components of system platform, right? These things don't need to be segregated as you see in this kind of rough, high level drawing, right? This is just to show the components, right? Some of these things can be consolidated and some of these things are actually preferred to be consolidated, like the automation object servers and the communication drivers. It's usually, the most common practice to have those two things being on the same operating system. But just so you know that these things can be, distributed as you see here, or consolidated into fewer operating systems. So why would I want to distribute some of those services that you saw on the previous slide, right? In a term that we call like task orienting the operating system. And really it's just, to make a simplicity of administration, both on, just the execution side of the day-to-day operations, but also on, things like upgrading and patch management, right? I can manage those individually, and because I've segregated those services, I can do those administrative tasks without incurring downtime or issues, whether it's visibility to the actual application or loss of data. And then in terms of allocating resources, right, it's important to know how those resources are being allocated to each of those services and what they really utilize in terms of services. So bigger is not always better, and we'll go into some of the components of just touching on some of the resources that should be considered. So for the Galaxy repository, right, the main thing here is, have a decent enough memory, right? 16 gigs of memory will usually be sufficient for most systems. In terms of logical processors, right, the real functional use case of having multiple processors on a Galaxy repository is to have parallel deployment of platforms. So if I have multiple platforms and I do a large deployment, right, I can have those deployment services execute in parallel if I have multiple logical processors to handle those things. And for disk space, right, really, having enough disk space to host the configuration of the Galaxy, and really the key thing here is really having a solid state drive, right? Having speed and performance rather than space is the key thing for the Galaxy repository. If you do choose to implement a system management server, right, that's the component that's going to manage those TLS 1.2 certificates. The key thing here is, it's ideal to have a small kind of dedicated VM to handle that, and interactive logins for that computer should be disabled. And really, that's the central system that's distributing and renewing all those certificates. For the historian, right, memory and logical processors are affecting, client and query performance. Disk space, right, especially for that circular disk space, right, which is that first storage location that the historian utilizes, is make sure that you have a solid state drive for that location. There are other locations like alternate, and that can be on other media, right? And it doesn't, those other alternate locations don't even have to be local to that historian. When it comes to SQL Server, right, Express or Standard is fine. Remember, when it comes to the Galaxy repository or the historian, the SQL Server portion is just there for configuration data, right? The actual process data is not being stored in SQL Server. It's actually being stored in our history blocks. And the reason why the historian is usually a good starting point is a couple of reasons. One, it actually doesn't have a platform deployed to it, so it's not necessarily having a part being a part of that Galaxy. So it doesn't necessarily have to maintain the same version. And it can be a higher version than all the other application server services that are a part of your Galaxy. And as you're upgrading it, right, the data will still be visualized in the runtime, and the storage will just be executed in a store and forward state. So automation object servers, or AOSs, right? The key thing here really is RAM and processors, right? It's mainly a process-oriented service. So storage space is really only there for store forward events, largely. So you don't need too much, right? 256 gigabytes is, for most systems, is going to be sufficient. And then especially if you have redundant AOSs, you're going to want two network interfaces, one for the process LAN to communicate with all the other computers in the system, as well as for that redundancy, or that redundant message channel LAN as a second network interface card. One thing to note is patching and upgrading an AOS, especially if you're doing an in-place upgrade. We'll get to what that means in a second. But these AOSs are independent of each other. So I still have the flexibility of upgrading one by one without affecting the performance or execution of the other one. And then lastly, the communication drivers, right? The main thing here is, if you're considering, if you're experiencing maybe an expansion of maybe the number of assets that are part of the system, and you're maybe considering limits on the threshold of what that instance of communication driver can take. There's multi-instance features of the drivers that allow you to instantiate multiple instances of a driver for better isolation of traffic and ease of management, and really increased I/O performance. So system architecture, right? In general, right? Review the galaxy, right? Document what I have, right? If I am a legacy application and I did implement field attributes, right? Can, execute and convert those to, plan to convert those to newer native attributes and getting rid of those field attributes, as a part of, the upgrade process. There's a built-in utility to go through this and help that process through it. So you see some screenshots here of kind of some screenshots of how that works. And then, validate that the galaxy is in a good state, right? I don't have any errors or warnings, right? And I've kind of captured all the other components, right? I've got, maybe third-party add-ons or additional controls like .NET, ActiveX controls that maybe will migrate over, or if I do my research and I find that, those controls are no longer supported on newer versions, then finding proper replacements for those. So first things first, right? Back up everything, whether it's VMs, whether it's creating images of physical OSs, making a backup of the galaxy, backing up historian configuration files, databases for the historian, and the history blocks as well. In terms of the IO servers, DA servers, OI servers, right? All the same name, just different, or same thing, but different name. But really, the main thing here is to focus on is just, ensuring that the new version of that OI server or communication driver supports the install base of your existing or new PLCs or controllers, RTUs, whatever you have a part of your system. And then, as with everything else, right, back up those files as well, right? They'll eventually be a part of that execution of the upgrade. In terms of operating systems of, hey, what operating system can we migrate to, right? Oftentimes a big reason for an upgrade is I'm running on a unsupported operating system by Microsoft, or an unsupported version of SQL Server, right? Those types of unsupported components of an architecture are, I would say, the most common driver of an upgrade. But there are definitely other reasons and to upgrade as well. But you can go to our support website, type in the component that you want to verify in terms of operating system, and you can get not just operating system and databases, but what virtualization do we support, product interoperability and coexistence, as well as some product notes. So you can kind of see some detail there. If you can kind of do it the reverse, right? You're like, I want to, standardize on SQL Server version X, right? You can go into that same matrix and type in your SQL Server version and see not even just the system platform components, but all the AVEVA software components that are supported on that SQL Server version. So another way to go about it. And then if I'm running antivirus software, right? Ensuring that I've got the proper exclusions. There's a tech note that you see there that kind of highlights the exclusions that I want to consider. But in addition to those exclusions, I want to make sure that the storage locations for some of the components of the system are also excluded. Things like the historian storage locations, right? In the SMC, right? I can see the storage locations that are configured here. In the platforms, I have the history, store, and forward location. Notice any blank field that you see here is going to be the default location. So same with the App Engine store and forward directory. If it's blank, it's going to be the default location. All right, execution. Let's get to the good stuff. So from a network perspective, right, when we're executing, right, in most situations, right, we want to work with the same subnet for the system platform machines, right? If there's And then all, taking consideration any firewalls, right? If I'm replicating from a tier 1 historian to a tier 2 historian, right? Ensuring that the necessary port or ports are open to, still facilitate that architecture. And for the internode communication, ensuring that the all the appropriate ports are open to allow for that node-to-node communication. And if you want a detailed list of what nodes or what ports are required for what services, that's all documented in our system platform documentation. So there's two main upgrade options that I want to cover today, is a parallel upgrade and an in-place upgrade. There's a third one, but called a node replacement upgrade. I would say that's the least common. So if you have questions, just reach out. But just for the sake of time, we're going to focus on the parallel upgrade and in-place upgrade. So for a parallel system, right? The parallel system is set up where I'm setting up new hardware, new virtual VMs, and I'm setting that up in parallel with the existing running system. So really, I'm setting up the new nodes for my GR, for my AOSs, for my historian, right? I'm setting up an identical set of computers that I'm then going to load software, license, and eventually load the configuration and application onto their respective components. Right? Because they're going to be eventually stood up in parallel with the active system, right? I want new node names and IP addresses for all components of that parallel system. And when I create a Galaxy, I want to create one from a backup cab file, right? Really ensuring that not only all the objects are captured, but all the security is still maintained that has been previously configured. All the libraries that have been imported, like script libraries or third-party libraries that have been imported to the existing system. So all those things get transferred over when I make a backup of the cab file or the cabinet file. When I make in the actual software itself, right? If I have, on my app engines, right, it's got a node name of how it's sending data to the historian, right? Or which historian it's sending to, right? I want to replace all those references to match the new node names. And then, right, I can go by one, right? I can start deploying the GR platform, ensuring that I have success. And then going down the list, right? I can start with the AOSs, and then I'm ensuring that I'm getting good data communication with my objects all the way down through to my controllers and PLCs. And then, the historian and any visualization client would be the following standpoint. You want to also deploy that redundant engine, including the partner engine as well. Okay. So ensuring that the Galaxy, right, validates correctly, right? If there's errors or warnings, right, as I'm deploying that Galaxy, I want to correct those errors. And then ultimately, when I've got, a healthy system, maybe I have a trial period of, a couple days, a week, right? Whatever we deem is kind of acceptable. Then we can then go ahead and decommission the old Galaxy platform nodes and solely rely on that new system. So pros and cons for a parallel system, right? As mentioned, it's probably the best choice if I'm implementing new hardware or virtualized environments, because it's the cleanest in terms of accommodating that new hardware and operating systems. It reduces any really point of downtime, and it gives you an opportunity to have a reference point, right? I've got an application that I know works, and I've got something that I've just implemented and I compare side by side. the cons, right, is I'm gonna need additional hardware or virtualization. Sometimes that's required or needed anyway, so it's not necessarily too much of a con. And then, as I mentioned, right, whether it's node names and objects in the system, maybe it's scripts that are references, maybe it's configuration databases. Those things need to get, searched and replaced, and make sure that the node names or IP addresses, if those are explicitly referenced, are changed. So an in-place upgrade, right? This is, I've got an existing system and I'm going through node by node and upgrading each system to a new version one at a time. So this is using the existing hardware and upgrading the software as we're running. I would say that to ensure the least amount of downtime, it's often best to consider this if I have a redundant system. If I have a non-redundant system, you can still execute this, but know the consequences of that, right? As I upgrade my AOS nodes, right, I'm going to lose data during that period of time. So that's why it's best to have redundancy, because I can still maintain that data availability. So first step, right, is I would undeploy the GR platform. And then I can then upgrade the GR by uninstalling and installing the newer version of the software. And then I can, once I've installed that software and loaded the license, right, I can launch the IDE. And once I try to connect to that Galaxy, it'll automatically go through this automatic migration progress. And once it's completed, I'll then have access to my IDE and begin the deployment process. So when I have that GR node still in its undeployed state, right, confirm that all the existing platforms are going to be this, I would say, unique state called software update pending, or SUP, right? And it's going to be a yellow box with a smaller black box next to that object. So I can deploy the GR platform. Note that as I'm doing this, even though the versions are asymmetrical, the AOSs, the historians, right, those things are still executing and running fine, right? I'm just managing and changing the GR, right? The only thing that I can't do while I'm doing this process is I can't make changes to the system. I can't deploy new things, right? So that's the thing that I have to consider when choosing an in-place upgrade. And then I can then begin by, when upgrading the AOSs, I want to start with the backup AOS first. So I can upgrade, undeploy the backup AOS, go through the same process of installing the new software. And then when I install the new software and go back into the IDE, I want to then just deploy the platform. So I want to ensure that this cascade deploy is unchecked. Ensure that I have proper node-to-node communication with that platform. And when I have success, I can then deploy the backup engine with the cascade option checked. It'll just give me a warning that the partner engine is in a upgrade required state, and it'll allow me to deploy it. So when we check that second AOS, we want to make sure that the running redundant engine is green. There's no errors or warnings. It's running on scan, and it's as identified as the backup in the SMC. I can then move to the upgrading of the AOS platform. Now, when I undeploy the AOS 1, right, all the objects that are executed on that will fail over to AOS 2. and run on the standby engine. So I'll still maintain visibility into the data, but there will be a failover event as I'm undeploying AOS 1. When I then I go through the same process of installing the new version, opening up the IDE, just deploying the platform first. After successful deployment of the platform, I can then deploy the objects for underneath, the engines and areas and objects underneath that platform. And then to get it back into its original state, I can do a force failover to have all the objects that are now running on AOS 2 to be pushed to AOS 1 to have it back into its original state. So pros of an in-place upgrade is it's a seamless upgrade of just one galaxy, right? The galaxy is still running. There's no additional hardware needed, right? As long as the existing OSs and SQL Server versions, right, are supported, right? I don't need to replace that hardware or virtualization. And the operators can still do their jobs, right? They, as is, right? They really don't really see, in an ideal execution, I should clarify, they don't see a interruption as the upgrade is occurring. The cons is there is more risk when doing that, right? If things go wrong, right, and I need to roll back, that rollback of those events is difficult, right? I want to ensure that I have backups of those images or VMs so that I can return a system, easily return a system to its previous state. And I want to ensure that the steps are taken and done very carefully, because improper execution of those orders can kind of result in some downtime. So lastly, on the validation side, and I'll kind of quickly highlight it. For all the visualization nodes, especially if I'm an InTouch visualization user and not using OMI or Operations Management Interface, I want to open up each InTouch application on each node to convert all the windows to the new version, right? So you have to actively open up the application in order for it to go through its process. There have been known issues for a cyber reason endpoint protection users, so antivirus software. And so there's some disclaimers there to really, when you are working with nodes that have that type of endpoint protection software on there, is really to uninstall it first and execute the migration and then put it back on. Stopping just the process has been found to not be enough. And again, I referenced the tech note there. So during a checklist of items, I do have details on how to execute all these items in this checklist, but for the sake of time, I'm just going to leave them as a checklist because we are over, but I'll run through it, right? Verifying that all my platform engines and app engines are running on scan, right? Everything is in a healthy state. All my redundancy or partner statuses for the historians, for my app engines are all in a standby ready state. All my device integration objects are properly connected to their DA servers or OI servers, right? I've got all good, healthy communication. My redundant DI objects, right? They have healthy connections to both the primary and backup device integration object sources. If I'm using InTouch, all my InTouch HMI screens are updated with their proper data and healthy data, right? I don't have, errors or warnings on my graphics that I see on my new upgraded InTouch screens. With OMI, right, if you're using OMI, you don't have to do that process of upgrading or opening up the application. That's not required with OMI. For app engines, right? They're all properly configured to be historizing to the new historian, especially if I've done a parallel upgrade, so that I'm, things might be running healthily, right? But they're actually in a store forward state because the historian that they're trying to get to, right, is maybe no longer exists, right, or was decommissioned, right? So ensuring that they're, properly historizing to the proper historian. The historian is actively collecting data, right? All my clients to the historian can correctly retrieve that data. And then, in terms of, just checking a quick check of the services list, ensuring that all of them that are supposed to be started automatically are in a running state in that services menu from your operating system. And then all node-to-node communications is still working effectively in the Galaxy. And then lastly, right, as a final kind of sanity check, right, I don't have any errors or warnings in the SMC logger for any of my nodes. Right, those things should be all resolved on a successful SAT, in terms of validation of an upgrade project. So I'll stop there. I'll kind of field the questions that might have been inputted and go from there.
Awesome. Thanks, Tim. So we did have a few questions come through. The first one is, what if we do not convert these attributes as there are too many attributes? Sorry.
If you're talking about the field attributes, it'll still be migrated over. You can still run on those field attributes, right? They're just a deprecated and kind of a component of the system in terms of support, right? There's not ongoing maintenance to ensure that those field attributes are going to run in the future. I think I see another one in a parallel system upgrade. How can we keep the same node within the new system? If you're talking about same node name, same node name, yeah, okay, I got you. So in a parallel upgrade, you can't. That's not possible within a parallel upgrade. What you can do is you can either do the in-place upgrade that I mentioned before. The third type of upgrade, which I didn't cover just for the sake of time, is a node replacement upgrade, right? If I want to keep the same node name, but I want to replace replace the hardware or virtualization, there's a concept called a node replacement upgrade. It's a little bit more risky and we'll have a little bit of downtime for doing so, but it is possible to keep the node name in that state.
Awesome.
And then lastly, how we handle licensing in a parallel system. Great question. So in a parallel system, right, especially if you version upgrade, right, we'll give you a new instance of that license. So if you're running version 2017, you'll receive, if you're going to 2020 or 2023, you'll receive a new copy of those licenses, and both sets of licenses will work in parallel. So you can keep the existing licenses, and then you'll have the new set of copies of licenses that'll run on the new system.
Great. No, I think that is all of our questions for now, but if anyone has any questions at a later time, feel free to reach out to us and we will get those answered.
Thanks, everyone. It was a lot to cover, so thank you.
Yes, thank you, Tim, and thank you to everyone who attended. If you would like to review any portion of this webinar, a recording will be available on YouTube and our website, california.avevaselect.com, once available, and you will be receiving a copy of it via email. Thank you again for attending and have a great day.